The only way to stop illegal immigration, if you want to call it that, is to prosecute corporations that exploit immigrant labor. I mean, it's very simple. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Larry in Modrow, Oklahoma. Am I saying that right, Larry? It says here you disagree with me. What do we disagree about?
Well, my deal is I know Democrats want to open the border, and I know that Mexico is part of the North America. But if you open the border, what is it going to do with the other part of the United States?
Okay, good question, Larry. Number one, the border has never been closed. Prior to the pandemic, I mean, that slowed things down. But prior to the pandemic, about 1 million people a day would come into the United States from Mexico, and about 1 million people a day would go into Mexico from the United States. People, we have tourism. The people who took down the towers on 9/11 didn't sneak into this country across a border. They came in on tourist visas. And in fact, the majority of people who are in this country without documentation came here as tourists, not jumping across a border. So number one, the border has never been closed. To the best of my knowledge, the only country I've ever visited with closed borders was East Germany back in the 1980s. That was closed borders. But we don't have closed borders, number one. And number two, if you're concerned about people who are not citizens coming to this country and setting up shop here, living here, then why don't you join with me in saying that Ronald Reagan's policy of no longer prosecuting employers who hire people who are not citizens should be done away with? In 1986, Ronald Reagan pushed through his immigration reform legislation, and it kept it illegal. It retained the illegality. If I hire somebody who is not a U.S. citizen and does not have a work permit, under the law, I could go to jail. But Ronald Reagan said, we're not going to enforce that law anymore. And prior to that, in the early 80s, if you're old enough to remember, Larry, the construction trades were some of the best jobs around. It was all unionized. Meatpacking people were among the highest paid workers in America. It was all unionized. And Reagan did that specifically to bust the unions, because the unions were a major source of funding for the Democratic Party. So, hey, if we bring in largely Mexican labor and we no longer prosecute the employers, and so those people can replace the unions, we have defunded the Democratic Party. That's what Reagan did, and no president has changed that policy since. And I think that you should, if you simply said, if you're here without permission, you can't work, as every other country does. I lived in Germany for a year. I had to get a work permit. I worked in Australia. It took me 3 months to get a work permit for 2 weeks of work in Australia. If we were simply to enforce those laws, Larry, that Republicans refuse to enforce.
Well, the only thing that I know Ronald Reagan did that was great during his presidency was stop the Cold War.
Yeah, I agree.
That was the greatest thing that he did during his presidency.
And I think Reagan deserves some credit for that, Larry, because he, when what's his name with the birthmark on his forehead, reached out to Gorbachev. When Gorbachev, I've been in the room with him. When Gorbachev reached out to Reagan, Reagan accepted that hand and met with him, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. Although the Soviet Union was disintegrating because their system just didn't work. And you can't quite give Reagan credit for that. But I'll give you that, Larry. But, this whole thing about, oh, my God, there's immigrants coming and they're going to take your jobs and stuff. The only reason anybody in this country can take anybody's job who's here without documentation is because, starting with Ronald Reagan, we haven't had an administration that is enforcing the law. Even Donald Trump refused to enforce the law. In fact, he ordered, with an executive order, the meatpacking companies, he ordered the workers who were not U.S. citizens to go back to work in the meatpacking companies when they were dying from COVID. I mean, that's how crazy it is. So, Larry, I think your complaint is with the GOP, although I would like the Democrats to pick this up as well.
It's not GOP, but, I understand that Biden's wanting to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour, and I understand that, but is it going to, if I go to McDonald's, is it going to cost me $12 to get a Big Mac?
No. The cost of labor is such a small percentage of the cost of almost every product sold in the United States. Raising the minimum wage to 15%.
I got a friend that raises beef in North Dakota, and he can't even sell his beef because the price of beef, ain't margining out to what his normal price is.
But that's because people are figuring out that if you eat a lot of meat, you get a heart attack and a stroke. That the eating habits in America are changing, Larry. That's got nothing to do with policy, frankly. But raising the minimum wage to $15 just takes the minimum wage back to about 10% below where it was in 1968 in terms of actual purchasing power. And we were doing just fine in 1968. You could buy a burger. In fact, in 1968, McDonald's was selling a hamburger, fries, and a milkshake for what, 25 cents for a three-course meal was their slogan? So we can do that, Larry. We can do it. Larry, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I really appreciate dissenting voices on this program.